Look, money is a network business, and if you're trying to go in that first category of stablecoins that are going to have broad market appeal, taking on a consortium approach where you have these nodes that are part of the network and can earn in the economics, I think was a really interesting and smart strategy.
That's Sheraz from Solana Foundation. With a background at American Express and Google, building early Google Wallet and Google Pay, Sheraz joined Solana in 2021, joining during the bull run, surviving the FTX collapse, and now watching Solana emerge as a central enterprise payment infrastructure. Solana is open source and requires no permission to build. In this conversation, we reveal why major players like PayPal, Visa, and Stripe have chosen Solana, and how confidential transfers could unlock domestic payment use cases for confidentiality-focused stablecoins. Here's our episode with Sheraz. Season 5 of Stableminded is powered by the Global Dollar Network, the fastest growing stablecoin network in the world. Anchorage Digital, Kraken, Paxos, OKX, Robinhood, WorldPay, Bullish, and many others are earning real revenue from stablecoin activity across minting, custody, and payments. At the core of the network is USDG, a US dollar-backed stablecoin issued by Paxos. Global Dollar Network shares reserve yield directly with its partners. Join the network moving the ecosystem forward. Visit globaldollar.com/network to learn more. All right, Sheraz, how are you doing today?
Good.
Thanks
how
for joining.
Thanks for having me.
I'm doing great. We have not ever talked to an L1 on the show before, so this is a first for us. We're really excited.
Excited to be the first.
Yeah, we were just reminiscing on when we met. This was Money 2020. There's so much that we're going to cover here today. I'm really excited for this. Give us some perspective first on where you sit within the Solana team and the foundation, and maybe help people wrap their heads around also how that group is organized. I know there are a couple different groups within Solana that all focus on different things. That might be a good place to start, and I'd love to also get into your background too, a little bit of how you got into the mix as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, think about how much has happened since we met at Money 2020, right? It's quite a time. Your timing was great, by the way, to start this. So kudos. Yeah. So brief context. So my role work at the Solana Foundation. My official title is GM of Payments and Commerce. Yeah, but at a high level, Solana Foundation is a nonprofit based in Zug, Switzerland, focused on the supporting the growth of the Solana ecosystem, really. So we're a small team. We're not a really commercial team. We're just out there to try and support builders, large companies that want to build on the blockchain. So within the foundation, we have a growth team that focuses on different verticals. So payments is my focus, but we have a team that looks at DeFi. We actually have a separate team that looks at stablecoins. And by team, it's usually 1 or 2 people. Gaming, institutional, etc. So we're small and lean, but we operate in a 10x kind of way. And it's really about the builders that are building on Solana, whether it's large companies or startups, and just supporting them in their journey. And my focus is payments, as I mentioned. And my background is to your question. I'm not a long-term, my crypto origin story was literally joining the Solana Labs team in 2021. I knew very little about crypto. I mean, probably just like a layperson. My background is more payments. Worked at American Express for about 8 years, and then after that worked at Google for a similar chunk of time. Worked on the early incarnations of the Google Wallet and Google Pay apps. So I kind of came at it from a much more of a payments point of view. So this is why this point of time and this journey is particularly more fun and exciting, I would say. It's always been fun, but it's now stuff is getting real. I don't know.
It's getting real.
Yeah. If I'm allowed to curse, let me know on your podcast.
Please. Yeah. Be you. That's all I ask.
Amazing. Okay.
So that's actually surprising to me. I think a lot of people who are, especially those who are entering, specifically the fact that you were able to get into, I mean, your background's amazing, obviously, but just the maybe awareness of crypto knowledge and just like the ethos. I think a lot of people expect that, you need to be down the rabbit hole for years in order to land that sort of role. I'd be curious how that actually happened. Like for someone who may have been early in the journey of learning about this stuff, how you came across Solana, what drew you into that ecosystem to begin with, and maybe I'd love to know how it's turned out compared to what you thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to, I could pretend to be all like, I saw the future and this and that, but I'll be honest, and you said be myself, right? So it was not very thoughtful. It was more, I was working at Google. It was my second stint at Google. I was working in cloud, and I was working on AI, actually, AI projects, conversational AI. I was just basically burnt out. I was working on massive enterprise projects. And I actually reached out to Mike Dudas, who's a good friend, and I was just kind of curious to see what was going on. It was more of a learning thing. Maybe I could do a side project. And he connected me to the founders, Ajantoli. And after I kind of scratched the surface a little bit more and understood the thesis, it started to get more exciting because they were building, the thesis around Solana was fast, cheap, scalable infrastructure. And obviously for payments, it made a lot of sense. And I think the timing was great because, they had just launched, I think it was probably a year of existence on mainnet for Solana, a little over a year. And I think they saw the future more than I did as well in terms of thinking about payments as a use case. So it was just serendipitous. I've always been interested in technology, so I think that did draw me into the whole kind of side of the blockchain side of thing. It was less of a religious thing for me, like it is for some people, and more of just like interesting technology that could be used for payments. Digital assets, stablecoins were just coming into existence at that time. So I kind of joined then, and in the 4 years I've been in the ecosystem, the nature of my role has changed a lot. In the beginning, the first couple of years, it was a lot more about just, supporting the core protocol, as it was growing up and scaling, and payments and stablecoin use cases were much more speculative, small pilots. We were trying to do payments pilots with merchants, but merchants did not know nor did they want to custody stablecoins, which is something we'll talk about. These were brand new assets. They barely knew what they were. Fast forward to where we are today, and now we've got every major PSP and, card issuers. Everybody is kind of looking at stablecoins and digital assets. So it's been a very dynamic 4-year journey.
Yeah. A wild 4-year journey for the industry. When I think about 2021, this is actually right around the time, probably that year I joined Coinbase, which I'm curious at what point of that year you joined, because I know Solana is so much more than a price on a feed, obviously. But if you look at the 5-year chart here, it's pretty wild of what happened in that year. And then 3 years afterward, kind of the trough of sorrow that at least the asset itself went through. What was it like being joining in that year that was such a rocket ship type of year, and going from now until then, really like that period of, I'm looking here at top of 2021, you guys were like 250 roughly, and then it went all the way down to like around $10. That's a wild to be in that community, in that team. What was that like, and to get through it?
Yeah, it was a roller coaster, which made it entertaining. I joined July 2021. So there are definitely some peaks and valleys. And I think you just have to be tempered. You have to, when things are high, you have to be sort of like, take everything with a grain of salt. And when things are low, you also have to realize that, that this is not the end of the world, right? So after FTX, it was a bit of a rough ride. But I think for me, I saw Solana for what it was, which was like incredible open source technology that anybody could build on. People tried to associate Solana with FTX, but the reality is they were, two completely different entities. One is open source technology. It's a blockchain. The other was an exchange. So I think it was just kind of like keeping our head down and staying focused on the mission, which is to build fast, cheap, scalable infrastructure, and being sort of long, being long in the entire market. So it was just kind of riding it out. It was a little bit, maybe not as, people were a little bit, maybe more down, but I don't know. To me, it was just kind of like, just continue doing what we're doing and take it with a grain of salt.
What is the difference for you now working at the foundation, working with builders, working with teams, building on Solana, compared to what it was like working at MX or Google? Like, what's the culture like? What's the community like? I'd imagine those two things are pretty different.
Yeah, one of the great things about working at a foundation, working, kind of in that role for an L1 is, when you're at a for-profit company, and I think you mentioned Coinbase, maybe you experienced that as well. You are much more, you don't have as much of a community. So when we're at Google, like building these wallet products, like it's pretty much just us trying to build and sell and gain adoption for this product. The great thing about Solana is like the reason we don't have a big sales team is we don't need one. We have an entire community of people building and evangelizing. I mean, we have this structure called super teams. In many countries, we actually have teams that are just not part of Foundation. They can get grants and then they can just run a Solana SWAT team in a specific market to help run events, help builders in that local ecosystem. It's in a way much more satisfying and gratifying in that, it's not like there would be a team of 10 salespeople and we're like, this is it. And like, we have to go out and conquer the world. Now it's, we have an entire community of people building, a huge developer community, a huge geographical community. So it just makes our job much easier because we're not one of 10 or 50 evangelizing this. We're one of a big community. So that makes it a lot easier. I mean, there is still sort of like a role we have working at Foundation, just really sort of being the lighthouse, but it's a much more scalable way to get a message across when it's not just like a small for-profit team that is like fighting against other for-profit teams selling the same products.
Yeah, in some ways, it's crypto's true promise or model, the network that can be and the community that can create. Talk to us a little bit about Solana in the last couple of years. Like since you've joined, I'd love to hear more around like right now, and we'll get into this, like stablecoins and payments, and what you've been focusing on is now, I would argue, like the bullseye of what everyone's talking about. Walk us through a little bit, maybe the journey so far of like how payments and Solana have looked, or what innovations, or maybe to be even more clear, like when you look back on the last couple of years, were there some moments or partnerships or product announcements, things that stick out to you as like really pivotal in the journey up until this point?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, right now, I think one of the nice kind of things about where we are right now is that I think Solana has clearly emerged as one of the primary, it's certainly going to be a multi-chain world. Like we're not making any sort of delusions of like, well, maybe some people believe that it'll be I think most people, consensus is there'll be a couple of chains and there'll be assets living across chains, and that's totally great. I think the great thing is that Solana is clearly one of those, chains that is sort of like, if you're launching a product, particularly in financial services or payments or institutional finance, like Solana is one of the chains that is sort of people need to default to. So that is a great.
I agree.
Yeah.
When did that happen? Because I mean, it's like, yeah, you guys it just deserves to be said. Like, you're not going anywhere. You got to integrate with it. When did that shift happen?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it was gradual and organic. I mean, I think if you if you think about why that is, like maybe if you take a step back, Solana has always been laser focused. If you talk to people at the protocol level, it is the North Star is, and now there's an acronym for it, IBRL, right? Increase bandwidth, reduce latency. It's always been about performance at the protocol level, making it faster, making it cheaper, making it more scalable. And I think because there has been a laser focus on that, it wasn't enough to be like, hey, we launched this blockchain and we've got people building on it, we're done. There is a constant desire to continue to improve and iterate, right? And so, Anatoly, the founder, will basically be like, our ceiling is the speed of light. That's sort of like the upper bound of like how fast this thing can be. So I think given the focus on this one North Star, it's manifested itself in the way the technology has worked. And I think more and more users, it started with people just doing simple stablecoin transfers and realizing like, oh, this is faster and cheaper. But as you kind of fast forward and use cases like memecoins, and like the one canonical example of a stress test of the network was when the Trump memecoin launched, which, it's an asset that went from nothing to, I think it was maybe 80 billion in 48 or 72 hours, and the network held up. And so I think to answer your question, I don't know if there was a specific moment. I think over time, as more and more people were building and seeing that the network itself was hardened, beyond sort of some of the early days of scaling up, I think people realize, I think there's the performance. And I think the second is the economy, the L1 thesis, global state machine, kind of composability. The more people build on Solana and the more they see things are composable. So if you build a project that's got a loyalty token, that same token standard works in any DeFi protocol if you wanted to, kind of deploy it in DeFi. And again, so the idea of there being one sort of composable global state machine, because of that, we have a thriving economy of different apps and use cases. So I think there is some critical mass there. And I think there are some major enterprise announcements that probably helped solidify. So the PYUSD announcement, PayPal announcing their stablecoin on Solana. Visa had done this RFP and picked a blockchain they wanted to go deep with. That was, I think, a couple of years ago, and that's when they announced that they're expanding their Ethereum settlement pilot to Solana. More recently, companies like Fiserv and Stripe and Shift4 and others. Yeah, I think it's been a combination of things. I don't know if there was any one moment. If you talk to developers, they would say that it's just the scalability and the ability to build products with good UX. If you talk to enterprises, it's a little bit of like, well, that big company did it, so I can do it now too, and it just kind of feeds on itself. So yeah, I think it's been a nice gradual thing. It's probably the last 12 months has been a pretty significant uptick just in terms of volume on the enterprise side of inbound.
Yeah. I'd imagine that you, given your role and given your background also just in, big tech and big payments, I'd imagine are in the rooms, you're in the meetings, you're talking with these large financial institutions about these partnerships, what they look like, how they're going to work. Bring us into those conversations a little bit. I'd love to know, like right now we're seeing a lot of these announcements come out, right? Like Visa's announcing stuff. Paxos is doing a bunch of awesome things. You're seeing JP Morgan and Coinbase joining forces. Like it's pretty wild. Those types of announcements don't happen in a week. Like they take, I would imagine, a long time. Like what's that been like for you? Any details or just even like perspectives of like what it actually takes to do these sort of announcements and these types of integrations, or your experience there would be interesting.
Yeah, it's very different from traditional enterprise kind of sales and BD motions. The reason for that is that no one owns the Solana blockchain, right? It's open source technology and nobody needs our permission to build on it. So it's not like, in traditional enterprise sales, you're walking in, you're like, oh, I've got a product or a platform and here's the pricing chart and let's sign a contract. We don't necessarily do that. And I would say more and more, a lot of the announcements you hear, sometimes I find out after the fact. And it's a great place to be, and I would love to be able to take credit for it. And so I would say it's evolved. I would say in the earlier days, we couldn't just sit there and assume that people knew why they should build on Solana. So in that case, there was a ton of the upper funnel motion in traditional BD and enterprise sales, where it's a lot of education, relationship building, explaining like what the technology is, how it's differentiated. And in the early days, I think there was more of a funnel where there are potential opportunities for commercial engagement. Now we're sort of at the point of time where we're not really a commercial entity. And from what it means then is that it's probably more of a motion of like working with key infrastructure partners. Those are the ones often selling in to the end business or the end customers. And by that, I mean stablecoin issuance, and orchestration platforms, Braille, Bridge, BVNK, wallet infrastructure providers like Fireblocks or Privy or Bastion or whomever. So I think there's sort of a different motion now that we're much more moving into more of a transactional thing where all these enterprises are now looking to actually build and understand Solana, know Solana. So there's still some education that we do, but at this point, it's more through the infrastructure providers that are actually selling to the end customer. So it's working with them, making sure that they support Solana in the best way, that they understand all the features. So if you think about Solana as at the lowest level, then you think there's like a middleware layer. For me, it's more working with the kind of the middleware layer, and they're the ones that are talking to the end customers, whether it's a PSP, or a payment network or a fintech or a startup. Now we talk to those folks as well, but it's often much more advisory, providing kind of higher sort of white glove technical advisory with some of our payments ecosystem engineers. But these aren't commercial. And again, it's just like ping us on Slack and we'll help you as you're kind of thinking about how to design like a new asset that you want to issue or a stablecoin or a payments use case. So yeah, I think it's changed. The nature of it has changed, and it's in a way gotten easier, in a way gotten harder.
Yeah, that layer, I mean, the layer you're talking about is a super hot, part of the stack right now. Like the acquisition space, or the innovation, the capital, the partnerships, the on ramps, the off ramps, liquidity, the wallets, the issuance. That's where all the action is, in my view. So, I mean, that strategy does seem really, really smart. What would you say? We have the issuance stack, the wallet stack. I'm just curious for perspective. Like, are you gonna? You think a lot of that is going to get consolidated into sort of like a single thing? I know folks like Bastion. I was with them for a little bit before I went to go start this. I know that they're taking an approach of like, let's try to do all of that in one place. I know Paxos is probably thinking of the same type of model in addition to issuance. Like, do you see that theme kind of go? You anchor in one and then you're trying to expand to others, or do you think there's enough like kind of defensibility and focus in all of those different areas?
It's a good question. I'm very bad at predicting the future. Uh, I would say I think if just my sort of layperson hat or kind of simpleton hat, I would say I think things that are adjacent make sense, but I think if you try and do too much, I guess you could call it horizontal integration, you start to lose focus, and then people that are much more laser focused on kind of one specific aspect of the stack can maybe provide a better offering. So I think you'll see both. I think as you get into the nuances and the details, generic wallet infrastructure or generic orchestration infrastructure could be supplanted by people that are much more focused on specific use cases, custodial versus non-custodial, or stablecoins under the hood or stablecoins for actual retail consumption, right? So to answer your question, I think that there'll probably be some that will provide kind of the full suite of offerings, and there are some that will provide more narrow offerings but go deeper and have a richer set of functionality. So I think it's like any kind of enterprise technology sort of landscape where you'll have specialists that go deep, and depending on your need, maybe they make sense. Or you'll have sort of generalists that, can kind of give you sort of the all-in-one sort of shop sort of thing. And I think there'll be trade-offs for both. So I don't think one or the other is gonna win out, but
yeah. When you think about that stack, you've mentioned a few of those names. Any like special shout outs or just teams that you think are in the last year, 2, 3 years have just been like in that layer, extremely crucial. You've seen just be building really, really great products or infrastructure that you've loved working with, or you think have really helped bring what Solana can do to market in a great way.
there are some, but one thing I've learned working at Foundation, if you do a shout out for 2 or 3, you're going to piss off
Oh, that's true.
the other 2
That's
or
true.
3 that you forgot about that probably deserve shout outs too. So I would say, yeah, I mean, I don't want to name any names, but I would say, let me put it this way. I would say that it's been really probably the most fun and exciting part of this journey, particularly in the last year, is seeing a lot of these builders that, particularly the ones that like I've been talking to for a couple of years, that, were doing the grind, waiting for this moment to come, and now are seeing, scale, or they're getting acquired, or their, revenue scaling up. So I'm just excited to see a lot of these builders that we were talking to in the early days, and seeing them in their kind of in the tough phase where they were just struggling, or, it was much more speculative. And, one of my favorite things is when I'm talking to a huge giant and they're like, well, who should we work with? And I know so many of the founders personally, and just being able to point business in their direction, and know that I'm helping them out, because a lot of these people have become friends of mine, and I want them to succeed. So and everybody sort of knows everyone, because we were all in this together over the last few years. I think everyone is, it's competitive, but we also sort of celebrate each other's success in a way. At least that's how I see it. Maybe I'm looking at the world with like rose-colored glasses, but I think everyone's pretty excited. So, yeah, I think there's a ton of players in the ecosystem that are doing great work.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about issuance and that part of the stack. This season, we're working with the USDG team and Paxos to really highlight this specifically. We'd love to dive into maybe just to start, like how you see issuance and stablecoins, and maybe for people who are just kind of wrapping their heads around it, how you see issuance generally. Like, I think that's a lot of people might just think, oh yeah, like the stablecoin issuer space, but I'm finding that there's like specific parts of it or specific approaches. I'd be curious how you in your seat think of all those different approaches, or something like a USDC versus a USDG. Would love your take
Yeah.
there.
I mean, I guess one sort of like breakdown that seems clear is that there seem to be stablecoin products that are being built for the masses, right? So USDC, USDG, USDT, PYUSD, where, the goal is broad proliferation and a desire for this to be used as a digital dollar global. I think there's another and probably more of a growing segment where it's stablecoin as a tool under the hood. So it could be a big bank payments processor, or a corporate expense company, or a company that does payouts that is saying like, I have an ecosystem. So let's take a payouts company, right? Like, and by payouts company, I mean central entity that has to pay out, like an Airbnb or Uber or Etsy, marketplace, whatever. And I'm just giving examples, not necessarily companies that are doing
Yeah,
this.
I think of CoinFlow and those types of businesses, and Braille and that stuff.
So Matt, if you have if you have a business, you have an ecosystem, you have to get money out to people in, or businesses in 200 countries. You might use a stablecoin under the hood just because it's a faster, easier way to get money. But that could just be your own stablecoin, right? So stablecoin as a service, and these white label stablecoin services, companies like Braille, for example, work with a lot of fintechs where they're like, hey, I don't need one of these existing stablecoins. Mint me a stablecoin so I can do payment orchestration in a much easier way, right? And so it starts and ends in my ecosystem, maybe with me as a central entity, and to payees that I'm sending out, like in the case of a payouts, like a payouts platform. A deal is working with BVNK, that's an example. In those situations, you could see a growing use of just stablecoins issued, for a specific closed ecosystem where it's not a stablecoin that's meant to be distributed and have like retail brand recognition. So I do think that that's going to be a growing area where it's stablecoin as plumbing and infrastructure and payments infrastructure. On the former, I think those are the stablecoins that there's, like a big, people are kind of going to fight over because they're at scale. These can be pretty lucrative businesses. And so in that space, I think obviously, I mentioned some of the big ones. You mentioned USDG. I think one of the interesting things about USDG, which is why we were on the foundation side really excited to partner with them and have them issue on Solana, was that, look, money is a network business. And if your stablecoin you're trying to go in that first category of stablecoins that are going to be sort of have broad market appeal, taking on a consortium approach where you have these nodes that are part of the network and can earn in the economics, I think was a really interesting and smart strategy. And launching with like Robinhood, Kraken, Anchorage was a great, set of anchor and founding partners for Global Dollar. So I think that falls under that category of like broad adoption stablecoins. But within that, you could view issuance as issuance in a consortium framework where all of the participants are sharing in the economics, and there's a lot of structure in how the economics are shared, versus some of the early adopters that just have huge network effects just by being first movers, like Tether and Circle USDC.
Yeah. With the integration or the work specifically, I'd love to know more around what this collaboration between Solana, the foundation, and USDG, the network or global dollar network itself, if that didn't exist, right? Like, what would that prevent from happening? Or because it exists, right, what does that unlock? Would love, is that an advantage for the other network participants, like the ones you mentioned? Does that make it easier to use Solana with USDG? I just would be curious to know more around strategically where you guys fit, because obviously you're different than and we're talking, what's cool about the season, right, is we're going around and we're talking to all these other network participants to see where they sit. So it'd be great to see your perspective on where you guys fit.
Yeah, I would say fundamentally, it's sort of what I was saying earlier, which is, with or without foundation, USDG would likely be minted on Solana, right? Because again, it's, Paxos or GDN, no one needs anybody's permission. They can mint on Solana, and there's a lot of good reasons to mint on Solana. I think the foundation wanted to work with Paxos and the Global Dollar team because, and again, we work very closely with the Circle team and the Tether team. So again, we're not, foundation is not here to pick favorites. But I think that, particularly given the focus on building a network of nodes and thinking about the payments use cases and being very enterprise focused, I think that seemed like a really interesting opportunity to build and work with a lot of the payments partners or enterprise partners that are part of this. So, our role is just kind of supporting the growth of the ecosystem. There is a standard, so GDN, the Global Dollar Network, has a commercial kind of framework for people that want to become members. Solana Foundation also has there's a ability to have like supplemental commercial incentives for those partners that want to make sort of Solana the default chain. And that's sort of our role in supporting that ecosystem.
That's cool. So if I'm pretty impressed when I was talking to Ronak on their team, just looking at all of these tier one partners that have joined this network now. Essentially what you're saying is like, if you are one of those partners and you're using this asset for something on like, I'm on Kraken and I'm using USDG in some way, to have preference to have that asset live on Solana versus another chain potentially. Is that kind of what you're saying, is having that be the default, having enhanced incentive there?
So, and again, this is more, on a case-by-case basis where there's an interesting opportunity, there's an ability to earn additional incentives, basically.
It's really interesting. We've been talking about, even with the Kraken team, we've already talked to them, just they're thinking through how do you want to the user, showcase what's happening on the back end? Does the user need to care if their asset, like how many people on Kraken or any of these other apps that use the platform actually care if they're stablecoin, or if it is a stablecoin? One, do they care if it's a stablecoin? And two, do they care where that stablecoin is sitting on what blockchain, So I can totally see the appeal if there's like an enhanced incentive behind the scenes there.
Yeah, particularly, everyone talks about the stablecoin sandwich. So in cases where I think they're if you want to have a very simplistic view of use cases, you could be like, there are use cases where the end user is opinionated about the asset and or chain, and there are use cases where the end user doesn't care. They're just trying to move money faster. And the latter is usually, I think, what kind of probably falls under the stablecoin sandwich meme or concept. And so, yeah, I think in the latter, I think there are a lot of reasons where if your end customer doesn't care, then if you're a platform, why not, leverage the asset that might provide you more features or benefits or commercial opportunities. I will say, I want to call out though that it's not just the commercial benefits. We do have one of the really interesting innovations that I think is very untapped that I would kind of love to touch on, and hopefully is in the roadmap for USDG and other natively issued assets on Solana, is token extensions. I'm sure some people have heard of this, but the TLDR is token extensions are an updated version of the smart contract that you use to issue assets on Solana. And the term extensions refers to a set of extensions you can turn on when you mint, for example, and use stablecoin on Solana. Things like the ability to send the asset with confidentiality, the ability to create a programmatic whitelist or blacklist at the asset level. So let's say you were minting an asset and you just wanted it, the example I gave, where you're a payouts company and you just have a closed ecosystem of customers that you want to be touching this asset, you can mint your own stablecoin or own dollar, tokenized dollar of your company, and have a little list of accounts that are the only ones that can ever touch that asset. And so I bring this up in that one of the things, and so this is, I believe, should be on the roadmap for USDG. So things like confidential transfers, there are still some protocol level finality updates and auditing that's being done, but I think probably in 4 to 5 months, it should be ready for prime time. But this is going to be a killer feature, which will allow for masking of the amounts that are transferred and the wallet balances, but with auditability at the issuer levels. It's, it should not cause any issues, kind of the compliance or regulatory side. Like a subpoena could, the issuer, if they're given a subpoena, could unmask the specific amounts for a regulator. But in general, on block explorers and whatever, the amounts are masked, which I think is an important feature in payments.
That's massive, super exciting. What, from your perspective, I think wrongly people, this is my own perspective, I think people are wrongly, when they hear that, they think of like shady, like they feel like, oh, that's a shady thing. I actually totally disagree. What use cases in your perspective are blocked right now because that doesn't exist? Or what, maybe asked differently, like what do you see that unlocking for what industries or what specific use cases that get you excited?
Honestly, I think all of them. I think they're part of the reason why we are so early in this, and stablecoins are still such a tiny fraction of real payments volume that we haven't hit this on the head. So right now, I would say the stablecoin use cases that are scaling up, like all the cross-border use cases ones, are where you have really motivated participants. So like you have someone in LATAM or Africa where it's just a lot harder to get money in, or they want remittances and they want it in stablecoins and they want it instantly, whatever. So though, yeah, I think for those use cases, people are willing to overlook some of the shortcomings of blockchains, which is the kind of the data transparency. I think this is going to open up, but I've heard, again, anecdotally from payouts companies, for example, that have said that they've lost customers because they didn't, they had concerns about the payments volume being on chain and being people able to discern how much business they're doing. So I think it's going to open up. And if you think about like banks doing interbank settlement, or, Visa with issuer and acquire settlement, right now it's so small that it doesn't matter. But as this stuff scales, it's going to start to matter. If I'm an issuer and acquirer, do I really want, all of my settlement volume just on display for everyone to see? So I think it's going to touch every use case. We haven't hit it yet because we're small and people are just, piloting and going beyond pilots, or there's self-selection of use cases where people just want that, stablecoin use case so bad that they don't care about that piece. But I think it'll be relevant to every one of them. And again, so with the Genius Act, you have stablecoin issuers that work under a legal framework. Those issuers will have the ability to have the keys to unmask confidentiality if required. But in most cases, they won't, right? If everything is kind of happening business as usual, then you can have all of these payments flows occurring. You have this layer of confidentiality, but it's not, it's not illicit, because if there was anything illicit happening, the issuer has the right to kind of unmask those transactions.
Yep.
Now,
and token extensions for you guys is the key kind of feature that allows for this to be possible.
100%. Yeah. And look, if, I know there are people, in the deep crypto native world that don't love the ability for an issuer to be able to kind of mask and unmask confidentiality. If you don't like that, don't use it. But I can tell you that most enterprise regulated financial institutions, would want to work with a trusted issuer, would like the fact that their transaction amounts are confidential, but that there is a trusted issuer that has keys if there's some illicit activity happening and there needed to be some sort of investigation to kind of understand what's going on.
Yeah. It seems like, there's implementation, in my view, is always going to live in this like gray zone. Like there's never going to be all or nothing. Like I like the term custody and custodial versus non-custodial. It's like, it's actually a spectrum. And I think token extensions seems like a perfect part of the spectrum where it's like you're optimizing for the right things, and the wrong things were like, if let's just say you couldn't unpack, let's just imagine a world where like you actually couldn't, if you got subpoenaed, find this out or find what was going on. Like that's a huge risk. And, that's also like not an alternative that's going to get regulators comfortable with doing what we've been seeing them do. So yeah, it's really exciting. I know this has been something, I think you guys launched in 2024, like mid 2024 last year. My mind goes to like Canton Network and Digital Asset. I think they raised like $135 million last month. Like, are there any other companies that you see? I know Canton is like just one that comes to my mind that is like really trying to pioneer down this sort of confidentiality payments vision. Is there anyone else that you, I know I'm not trying to like get you to shout people out, but or anything else you'd like to add on this topic? I'll say that.
No, I think the benefit of having this feature with Solana assets is that you get the benefit of the broader Solana economy, right? So instead of the thing that I think the thing that can be troubling is the level of fragmentation, the number of like alternative blockchains and this and that. And so I don't know. It's just gets a little hairy, and I think if we can bring that feature to one of the most used blockchains in the world, then I think it just makes everybody's life easier, right? So you're not like if you want privacy and confidentiality, you have to go here, and if you want this feature, you have to go there. It's like all this fragmentation is not ideal. So to be honest, yeah, I don't. I mean, I'm sure there are other approaches to this, but I think thinking about kind of Solana land and the Solana native sort of ecosystem, which is it has a big economy. I think it's going to be it's going to be a differentiated feature, and I think again, it's early days, but I think Paxos with USDG could be kind of like on the forefront of kind of bringing this something like this to market. So yeah, I
When
think
you say it's the early days, as we sort of round third here and attempt to land the plane a little bit, when you say it's the early days, give us some perspective. I mean, you've worked, I'm thinking about like your days at American Express and the types of volumes and transaction volumes you even saw probably just there at that company. When you think about like when would it not feel like the early days in your opinion? Or what do you think will have to happen for us to start exiting this current phase, which I agree is early? Like are you looking at certain analytics or triggers or things that bubble up as like signals of like, okay, we're reaching exit velocity here a
yeah.
little bit?
I mean, I think the simplest one is just stablecoin market cap, right? So I think we're under 300 billion, and I don't remember what the M2 money supply is, but something like 20 trillion or whatever, right? So when we start hitting the trillion mark and stablecoin market cap, maybe that's when it's starting to hit escape velocity. And like I said, I think that there is to date it seems like there is a niche of use cases, and niche makes it diminishes it. Cross-border money movement obviously is big, and that seems to be kind of hitting escape velocity. Within domestic ecosystems, payment networks work really well. So I think it'll be interesting to see who can crack the nut, for example, for merchant payments, right? So like digital cash at the point of sale. I do think there's a value proposition there, absolutely, particularly for like, small dollar items or even large ones. But in any case, merchant payments is a huge use case. And to date, there hasn't been a strong value proposition for stablecoins. That doesn't mean that there won't be, but that's part of why I just say it's early days, right? So right now it's cross-border remittances, cross-border B2B money movement, and that's huge. There's a tremendous amount of velocity there. And I think that will help get us to escape velocity too, but it'll be interesting to see what happens in domestic payment networks as well.
It's awesome. Well, Sheraz, this is fun. This has been really great. Super fun. It's been awesome to dive into your role, your background, what you're thinking through. When you think about just the next 6 months as we close out the year and you're thinking about what's top of mind for you, your team, the foundation, types of builders you want to be talking with, the strategic priorities that you guys have going into the close of the year, what would be your final sort of call or invitation or things that you're thinking through that you would want to leave a stablecoin focused listener with?
I think that I think all of the really large players I think the change of administration and I think the Genius Act is the passing of that is accelerating like the nature of the conversations that you would have with some of the large players that can move significant amount of money that could really help get this to escape velocity. In the past, it was very much in the innovation phase, like the kind of like the smaller teams that would be doing kind of looking at innovation, but just sort of boxed away, like don't touch our core business. And now it seems that it's the core business that is really looking at how to integrate this. So I guess to answer your question more succinctly, I think it's some of these like very big brands like FIS, Fiserv, Adyen, Stripe, Visa, MasterCard, Amex, some of which have very explicitly stated what they plan to do, and others that are starting to get serious about this. Seeing what they do and seeing the first pilots that come out and how deeply they're starting to integrate into their flows, I think will be really interesting. Because I think that the crypto native platforms that have kind of built up more from the ground up, like the stablecoin orchestration platforms and wallet infrastructure providers that we talked about are, they're already there. They've already built businesses. We already have unicorns coming out of there, but it'll be interesting to see kind of the other end of the spectrum, like the biggest companies that can really move the needle, how quickly they move, and how quickly that can move that metric, as you mentioned, like the overall market cap.
Yeah. I think we've existed in this like infrastructure layer as the focus for so long, and like the acquisitions that we've seen this year and a lot of the buzz and capital is like that stack is getting pretty good. Like you can actually build a lot of great things with all of the builders who've been going and spending now years, really, like you said, in the trenches, building the core infrastructure and the speed, the transactions, the wallet tech, the issuance tech, everything that we're seeing here is like, I agree. The next really interesting chapter will be, okay, now what businesses are going to come in and use this stuff? What are they going to build to disrupt a category? I think about folks like Cast in the credit card space, or like, companies like that who've literally from first principles come in and said, or Dakota, like we're going to build this business from scratch with this framework of like using this stack to go disrupt that channel and that category. And the application layer is just really exciting for me too. I'm excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, we spent so much time on infrastructure, and there's a lot of good infrastructure, but on the flip side, when the big applications start coming in, you're going to realize there are some requirements we didn't think about when we were kind of like in our little bubble of just building infra for the sake of building infra. And so that will drive more innovation on the infra side, because now this is like you have to build for scale and build for real requirements rooted in real world kind of challenges.
Yeah. Shout out token extensions.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, man. Well, this was fun. Thank you for the time. It's always great to catch up with you, and
cool.
Thanks for taking this time.